I also welcome the chairperson, faculty members, and the students and the participants to this Gyan course program. Joseph Keshishian is an eminent academic. I was fortunate to read some of his writings, like Succession in Arab Monarchies, Succession in Saudi Arabia, then Political Stability in Oman, then Oman in the World, then Faisal, Saudi king for all seasons, then his work on political and legal reforms in Saudi Arabia, then from alliance to cooperation, the challenges Gulf Cooperation Council states face today, then his latest work on particularly how to uproot the Arab-Sunni influence, a geostrategic piece, particularly narrative. You know, the Western Israeli and Iranian domination. So if you seriously read his writings, I'm sure that you'll get some noble inputs in dissecting the intricacies of the Gulf political systems to a great extent. Today, Professor Keshishian will speak on the legal system in Saudi Arabia. Yesterday, he dwelt often at length on the Vision 2030, which all of you know that was launched in 2016 to achieve a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. So, but the structural mechanisms are concerned, as he discussed in his first day of the lecture on the political structure, particularly the legislature, Majlis al-Shura. So also the judicial system, the Qaza is extremely important. So the reforms are concerned, because judiciary is a justice delivery mechanism which would augment the social structure in terms of delivering justice to the common man. So in this context, he will deliver today in the first session on judiciary and legal system. May I request Professor Keshishian to deliver your lecture, please. Over to Professor Keshishian.
Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back to day 4. And thank you all for being here and for tolerating me for the 4th day. You have to go through this process one more day tomorrow. Hopefully my voice will hold until tomorrow. I'm still heavily medicated, but that's better. That way I won't make sense. You know, the medication will speak for itself. Of the 5 days that I prepared, what I'm about to deliver to you today is actually specially written for this class. And I sent the article, it's actually an article on challenges to legal reforms to Saudi Arabia, which I submitted for publication to the Contemporary Review of Middle East Studies that Professor Mudassir Qamar edits. Hopefully he will accept the article and he will not reject it. No, I'm confident that he will accept it. He's a good colleague. But what I'm about to do is actually a very complex topic that I want to explain to you. I'll go slowly because this is the most important chapter of the reforms of Vision 2030. Without legal reforms, everything else collapses. If you don't have a legal system that is sound, everything else is fragile. So therefore, I thought that I would give you an overall, and what I'm going to do in the first hour and in the second hour, actually identify the challenges, and in the second hour of this talk, maybe I will start, depending on how fast we go. Actually, I'm going to take several cases in terms of what happened after 2017. In some detail, I'm going to tell you about specific legal changes in the civil transactions law, which I think needs a lot of attention. That's the first one that everybody is concerned about. Then I will also talk a little bit about the personal status law and the changes that were introduced in it after 2017. Then, after we finish that, I will talk about the criminal law, which is the one that has not been published yet. It is still the one that is very controversial. So there are four of them that I will talk about. I will also talk about the criminal law, even though that has not been published. But we'll do it one at a time, no rush. So let me just go ahead and start. For years, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has declared itself one of the very first countries which promoted human rights, which of course surprised a lot of critics. Some pointed out that Riyadh imposed prison sentences on young men and women for barely writing tweets, or now as we call them X's, that were deemed to be frivolous. They forbade women from driving, they banned political parties, executed criminals in cruel ways through harsh death penalty practices, deported foreigners, tolerated child marriage, even opposed Valentine's Day celebration, which is of course a secular holiday that brought joy to many who celebrated. All of this was forbidden. The list of putative grievances was very long, and in the perceptions of many Western commentators, illustrative of what was wrong with Sharia Islamic law at a time of rapid global social, economic, and political transformations. It was within such a context that an overwhelming majority of critics were shocked in 2017 when they learned, one, that fundamental legal reforms were envisaged, two, that the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, the CPVPV, or the Mutawwa'in, which enforced Sharia in public, was literally hushed, three, that draft legal codes were circulated for comments to better address existing restrictions. At the time, that is starting in mid-2017, when Riyadh introduced its genuine list of legal reforms in civil laws, personal status laws, evidence laws, as well as the penal codes, very few critics believed that any permanent reforms could or would see light. An incredulity that took on dire consequences a year later when Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in Turkey. This tragic development, critics highlighted, confirmed various fears and, far worse, underscored that lofty declarations to pursue different paths were mere theatrical maneuvers, denigrators insisted. They were no better than carefully tailored public relations endeavors, they highlighted, concluding that the goal was to presumably portray Saudi leaders as reform-minded when they allegedly were not. The real goals of exalted legal reform plans were cosmetic, the critics insisted, whose objectives was to cajole Western investors to come in. In other words, pretend reforms, just so that you come in and bring the investment in. Pragmatic officials, fault finders concluded, sought financial resources to benefit the kingdom's long-term economic welfare that presumably necessitated such maneuvers. Riyadh was not going to introduce authentic legal reforms. Again, the same critics or the grumblers, to use a better word, people who grumble all the time. Because, they said, Sharia would not allow for reforms. And even if whatever so light proved to be compatible with Islamic law, they insisted that Saudi leaders were averse to risk-taking. They will not take risks for no reason. Now, notwithstanding the gloom and doom assessments, legal reforms were in fact introduced in 2017 as Saudi Arabia opened new legal chapters that aim to balance Sharia law with internationally accepted regulations, while commercial and trade legal precepts were far easier to introduce than social ones. Riyadh did not hide behind traditional values, and it did not engage in superficial transformations. On the contrary, it supported and committed itself to promoting and protecting human rights, which was a duty imposed by Sharia from which all of the statutes of the country were derived. It also recognized the need to adapt to modernizing times by sharing various burdens for the benefit of society at large. Now, this chapter or this paper for you aims to address some of the challenges raised by the specific legal documents. As I say, 4 specific legal documents. Now, I should maybe stop before I go on. The legal system in Saudi Arabia, as you've heard me say now several times, Sharia law, Islamic law, right? I mean, it's clear. There is no ifs and or buts about it. It's Islamic law, which means what? Which means the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, okay, the Hadith of the Prophet, the precedents that all these sheikhs and imams have interpreted. In Saudi Arabia, it's under Hanbali dogma, Hanbali rules that has been developed over centuries. In other countries, it's one of the other schools. So the entire legal system, from top to bottom, follows Sharia law, Islamic law. In other words, if you steal with your right hand, Sharia says we cut off your right hand. If you kill somebody with a gun, Sharia law says we'd kill you with a gun. If you murder a person, Sharia says we chop your head off. And that's what happens. Sharia law, it has, as I've explained to you now, I hope clearly, has specific rules. There is the hudud rule, whereby it's specified what penalty is for each crime. Murder, you get executed. If you commit child abuse, you get punished specifically. If you do wife abuse, you get specific. All of this is clearly delineated. And then there is the ta'zir punishments, which is to the discretion of the judge that is on minor criminal offenses. Ta'zir, it's concessionary rule. So it's all Sharia, okay? Now in 2017, it doesn't mean Sharia is out. Sharia is still there. In 2017, they did not say we're not going to follow Islamic law anymore. They said we're going to continue to follow Islamic law, but we're going to develop and codify. And I'm going to give you 4 specific examples. These are the 4 examples that they themselves introduced. So these 4 examples, 3 of which are already published. You can actually access the laws. You can go online, the ministries, different ministries. You put, for example, if you want to know about the civil transactions law. In fact, Sarah Al-Muhammadi and I co-edited a volume on legal reforms in Saudi Arabia, and we've included in the appendix, of course this book has not been published yet because it's still being reviewed by the government. Hopefully they will release it soon. But we introduced the 3 of the laws that I am talking about. The one that has not been published so far is the penal code, and I will talk about that when we get to that point. But the other three have already been published and they are implemented. The law is out there for judges and for lawyers to handle. Okay? So far with me? All right. So let's go in. I'm going to address some of the challenges raised by the specific legal documents: civil transactions law, personal status law, penal code, and law of evidence. 4 separate ones: civil transactions law, personal status law, penal code, and law of evidence. And I've divided the paper in 3 parts. First, I propose to examine how Sharia protects human rights. Some of you are going to laugh at this, saying, how can there be human rights in Saudi Arabia? But don't laugh. It's not a laughing matter. Critics who should know better but are too lazy to study, focus on one or few cases, and then the whole country is condemned. It doesn't work that way. You can do that if you want. If you're a journalist that is determined to denigrate, you can do that. But so what? Nothing changes. How did the first examination, how Sharia protects human rights? It bans torture in all of its physical and moral manifestations through strict legislation and executive measures that are applied to all. Torture is now banned. 2, it prohibits any physical or psychological harm to be inflicted on an arrested person. You can arrest somebody, but you cannot misuse that person. 3, you cannot degrade treatment. You cannot deny them to go to the bathroom, for example. When they have to go to the bathroom, you have to allow them to go to the bathroom. You cannot say you can sit there and do pee-pee on yourself, and that's not acceptable anymore. That's human rights. These precepts are usually overlooked in Western discussions that can be clarified, and it's critical to use a few human rights cases, which I'm going to do, despite blunders. I'm not saying it's all perfect and that everybody behaves accordingly. There are blunders, as illustrations of how the law is understood, codified, and applied. Second, I also aim to identify 3 of the 4 leading reforms that I said since 2017, including the all-important civil law codes and the super-sensitive personal status law. Personal status law has to do with marriage, divorce, child care, child custody laws, and all these very messy issues. When divorce cases come up, there can be nothing worse than that. And fundamental change, of course, in the penal law as well. My goal here is to evaluate the impact of these major additions to Saudi society. And the third, my paper aims to assess why critics refuse to acknowledge that a new chapter was opened in the Saudi legal environment, and whose responsibility it is to share such news. I will posit that a fresh direction of legal reforms is underway in the kingdom, one that might take several years to mature, but that inevitably will result in clearer codes in the books. Now, let me first and bluntly and openly address Saudi Arabia and human rights. That's the elephant in the room. Human rights. I'm gonna go ahead and go straight, tough, to the issue. Regrettably, Saudi Arabia does not enjoy a pristine human rights record, and in fact, it gathered global scorn for its purported abuses. In recent years, several egregious cases preoccupied human rights organizations around the world as governments lodged formal complaints with Riyadh, and in the case of non-governmental organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and similar groups, publicized sensational cases that naturally portrayed a very negative image of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Over the course of time, Such attention predetermined perceptions that, for better or worse, drew the ire of many who formed negative conclusions in academic as well as mainstream media outlets in many countries. For years, Saudi authorities feigned obliviousness with the damaging publicity, which accumulated resentments on both sides. And this is an argument that I have with my colleagues, because I always tell them, why aren't you responding? When somebody is accused you of human rights abuses, why do you keep your mouth shut? Why don't you defend yourself? Why don't you come out and say this is not true? Why do you just keep your mouth shut? Many pointed out to egregious human rights violations in developed societies, including in Western countries that championed democracy as the ideal panacea to avoid misjudgments, refusing to be singled out for any shortcomings. The kingdom is not a republic, they argued, and its leaders did not lecture the planet on the conduct when those who engaged in such scolding were not immune to and systematic abuses. The United States, for example, was certainly a democratizing society, though internal and external maltreatments were widespread. If you followed the news yesterday and today, you know what Mr. Trump is doing with deporting all these quote-unquote illegals. That's a human rights violation if there was one. Do you have any Saudi leader standing up and pointing the finger at Mr. Trump and telling him, you are a human rights abuser? No, they're not doing that. Should they do that? Perhaps they should. Perhaps they should. But they don't do that. The United Kingdom, another example, the home of habeas corpus. You know what habeas corpus is, right? You don't self-incriminate yourself in a crime. Habeas corpus, I mean, the English invented this several hundred years ago. It's equally caught in the misuse of human rights. Try to be an Indian or a Pakistani in London and see how you're treated. With scorn and derision. I don't need to portray the image, but you can watch on television. France, the country that literally invented the rights of man. It exploited human beings at home and abroad at will. We know French colonialism, what it did in Africa, especially in North Africa, in Morocco, in Algeria, in Tunisia, and elsewhere, for hundreds of years. And the way today Muslims are treated in France, including the debate over the hijab. It is forbidden for a Muslim woman in France to wear a hijab in public spaces. You cannot go to school wearing a hijab in France. If we were in Paris now, you will not be allowed to wear a hijab to cover your hair. You can do that in the United States, but you cannot do it in France. Isn't that a human rights abuse? She is entitled to cover her hair if she wants to. She's a free woman. That's her choice. Like others are free not to cover their hair. It's a choice that people have. How can you be, as France is, the champion of human rights and invented the rights of man? If you go to Paris one day, one of the places that you might want to visit is a place called the Trocadero. Trocadero is this very large esplanade in front of the Eiffel Tower. And there are all these mausoleums on both sides, museums really, where the invention of the rights of man are glorified. Well, a Muslim woman with a hijab cannot go inside. Well, isn't that a human rights abuse? So don't talk to me about Saudi Arabia breaching human rights abuses when you're practicing the same thing. Now, of course, the countries that I cited, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, along with many other democratizing nation states, and one can make a list of them: Australia, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Japan, Korea, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland. I could make a whole list. All of them qualified, in my book, for the relatively free societies, even if exploitations, cruelties, and neglect occurred in all of them, including against citizens. The debate was not that they fared better than most, but that these societies evolved into their current systems after centuries of human rights violations, while introducing carefully devised laws that presumably protected basic human rights. The merit that they added to the spread of global human rights values was precisely in upholding the principles they identified, debated, and adopted to respect every human being in their respective countries. It was when these same actors chose to bypass their own norms while they insisted that the rest of mankind apply them and impose sanctions against human rights violations elsewhere that they lost their value. This is a very harsh thing to say on my part. I'm an American. Don't forget that. I'm talking against the practices of human rights violations in my own country. But I have to be honest with myself that there are abuses in the United States, just like there are in the UK, in France, and elsewhere. It's one thing to preach to others, like Saudi Arabia, you are a violator of human rights. Well, how about me? What am I doing? Am I perfect? I'm not committing any human rights violations? What right do I have to lecture you about human rights abuses while I am also abusing human rights in my own country? One has to be objective about these things. As a conservative monarchy that lived according to the principles of Sharia law, Saudi leaders believe that all of their policies sustain divinely inspired precepts, something that every ruler in Saudi Arabia took quite seriously. In fact, while there was no formal throne in the kingdom, there is no crown in Saudi Arabia. Monarchs carried the title of the custodian of the two holy mosques, which was much more than an honorific. The king is therefore empowered to apply Sharia, not merely as a method, but also as a duty. And as we'll discuss in a few moments, Sharia carried strict respect for various human rights imperatives that apply to everyone. Again, this doesn't mean that there were no abuses of Sharia. There certainly were. But at least theoretically, Sharia protects human rights. This was a key feature of how human rights were assessed in the country, which now King Salman and his heir apparent Mohammed bin Salman upheld. Yet both men were equally determined to adopt transparency steps to improve how outsiders perceived Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, this is easier revealed than articulated, and as you will see in a moment, specific accusations lobbed by such organizations as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Freedom House, and many others were and could not be ignored at a time of great uncertainties. The chief complaint lodged by critics against the Saudi legal system concerned arbitrary arrests, arbitrary trials, convictions of peaceful dissidents, human rights defenders, and activists that served long prison sentences for merely criticizing authorities or for advocating socio-political reforms. This indictment was not negligible, when Riyadh announced important reforms starting in 2020 to expedite trials and exonerate those dissidents, activists, and independent clerics who were innocent. Prominent activists were released from prison after their trials, and while several were banned from travel, non-terrorist related cases were significantly eased. Simultaneously, and while the country applied Sharia as its national law, an effort was underway to create a written penal code and specifically worded regulations to assist judges, prosecutors, attorneys, etc. This was not a routine task that could be accomplished quickly. Moreover, established traditions in Arabic, there is a term that is used for traditions, established traditions. It's called urf, U-R-F, urf, with a ain, it's not the U. You have to put on top of the U a small hook. It becomes u instead of U, urf, which is established tradition. And it has nothing to do with the law, really. It's like what society has been practicing. And after a matter of couple of centuries, it becomes tradition, whether you like it or not. It's urf, okay? Now, established traditions meant that one did not break allegiance with the ruler. You did not go against the king. It's just not done. That's established tradition. If you're a critic and you're criticizing the king or the heir apparent, you're not practicing urf. It's not done. Or someone who tried to distort the reputation of the kingdom. No Saudi in his right mind is gonna criticize his own country. It's urf, it's tradition. Nobody criticizes. So when there is a critic that goes against the state, they're breaking urf. They are not following the tradition. By the way, it's important to bear in mind that this is not just true of Saudi Arabia and the monarchy in the kingdom. If you are in Thailand, maybe you've heard about this, but if you haven't heard, I will tell you. If you're in Thailand, nobody criticizes the monarchy of Thailand. You go to jail. You go to jail if you criticize the king of Thailand. So this is not just true of Saudi Arabia. Lots of societies practice these kinds of traditional behavior. You cannot insult the monarch in Thailand. In fact, insulting one's nation or its leaders, including in democracies, in Singapore, in Hungary, in Israel, in other countries, thousands upon thousands of residents are usually monitored for putative violations. Now, of course, in the United States, it's an exception, of course, I will tell you about it. In the United States, I as an American, but not you as an Indian, you cannot do it, I can do it. Because I will tell you why in a second. I can say Donald Trump is an ignorant man.
Yeah.
Not only he is one, but I have the right to say it. I can say he is incompetent. I can say he's ugly, which he is, of course. We all agree. We all agree. But you cannot say that.
Yeah, you can.
They will arrest you. But I can say that because the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment to the Constitution gives me that right. I am entitled to say that. I have that right. When I swore on the Constitution, I don't swear on the Bible or on the Quran. I swear allegiance to the flag of the United States on the Constitution. The Constitution protects me. It's a document that protects me. He might not like it. Well, too bad for him. Too bad for him. He can take me to court. He can arrest me. And he can take me to court. And a judge will have to make a decision whether or not I insulted him or not. That's the legal protection that the Constitution provides. And that's important to keep in the back of your mind. People have struggled for this. Now, I remind you that the United States Constitution did not land from heaven. People had a war, more than one. There was a civil war in the country as well. They fought for it. They, at the beginning, when they fought a war against the British, of course, and then a war against Spain, and then the Constitution was amended several times, and now there are 27 amendments to the Constitution, not one or two, 27 amendments to the Constitution. But you get the idea. Now, okay, having said all this, critics point out harsh judgments routinely issued by Saudi legal bodies that sentence defendants to flogging, for example, and in the case of capital punishment, beheadings that were deemed to be cruel. Dramatic new changes now have been introduced. As I've told you before, torture is now forbidden, and beheadings still occur, but only for the most egregious crimes. So this has been sharply reduced. Saudi legal reforms after 2020 bore its first positive results in 2021 when the executive branch, following through investigations and trials, did not carry out any drug-related executions despite the fact that illegal activities did not stop. After 2021, there has not been a single beheading for a case associated with drug concerns. Before, drug dealers chop chop. Not anymore. Now, beheadings are reserved for two very tough categories. Murder, which, as far as I'm concerned, it's fair. If you kill, you kill. Obviously, the punishment is execution. And the second area, which I am much more interested in, is child abuse. If you abuse a child, sexually or otherwise, you get executed. That's real. And that's the way it should be, if you ask me. You don't touch children. Now, this is, of course, the Ministry of Interior in 2021, where these statistics are available, confirmed 52 individuals were executed either by firing squad or beheading between January and the end of 2021, mostly, as I said, for murder. This is not an unusual record, and when compared to other developed or developing countries, was the result of a fair application of existing laws. Still, death penalty matters were very serious, and Saudi authorities sentenced to death and executed several individuals convicted of murder, robbery, rape, drug smuggling, and terrorism-related, following trials, of course, which detractors concluded were grossly unfair, even if this was, if you ask me, pedantic complaint. How could opponents determine how an independent country's legal system was unfair, quote unquote, much less grossly unfair? What does that mean? When similar accusations could be lobbed by anyone against any society. In February 2022, for example, the Saudi Human Rights Commission told Amnesty International that the country no longer executed individuals for crimes committed by minors and had commuted all such outstanding sentences. Before the reforms were introduced, minor criminals were also executed, which is unheard of in most Western societies. You have to be at least 18 or older to be convicted of these crimes. Younger children are usually given prison sentences. They're not executed. speaking in Beijing at the International Symposium on the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Deputy Chairman of Saudi Arabia's Human Rights Commission, Dr. Hisham al-Sheikh, stated that the kingdom was witnessing a great development in the field of protecting and enhancing human rights, adding that Saudi Arabia had witnessed solid achievements in accordance with what was included in the kingdom's Vision 2030 blueprints for socio-economic development. The gentleman, Al-Sheikh, indicated that it formed a clear approach that defined public policies such as the programs, initiatives, and goals, all of which complied with Sharia and the country's constitutional principles, which means the Quran, which included regulatory and institutional framework that addressed specific rights, since the Holy Scriptures, that is the Quran, called for very specific rights and privileges. For example, let me repeat 3 points. 1, ban on torture in all its physical and moral manifestations through strict legal legislation and executive measures applied to everyone. 2, the prohibition of any physical or psychological harm to be inflicted on an arrested person. And 3, rejection of degrading treatment. What I have said before, I'm repeating now once again, so that these are precepts that are compatible with Sharia because they are in the Quran. All right? Now, this did not mean that abuses did not occur, but that the kingdom remained true to its constitution, and it was divinely forbidden to engage in physical and psychological maltreatments. Moreover, and as a party to a number of basic international agreements in the field of human rights, authorities in the kingdom were duty-bound to protecting and strengthening human rights in accordance with international standards. In fact, this commitment was an obligation both to fulfill the provisions of Sharia as well as the country's firm commitments to introduce genuine legal reforms that strengthened norms and ushered a new set of codes, all of which could be applied universally in full transparency to secure justice for all across the nation. Al-Sheikh, again speaking in Beijing, in his declaration, was significant even if he fell below most radar screens. There hardly anyone reported on this at the time. Critics believed that these guidelines were not always applied, and they pointed out to the harsh treatment of women, for example, which was, as I'm sure you know, especially the women in the audience here, emotionally sensitive concern in Western countries where presumably women fared much better. They did not. Western women don't do better than most Eastern women, although they think they do. But in reality, they don't. Unlike regrettable conditions that women were exposed to in many societies where many, or I should not say many, some, were subjected to sexualized, physical, psychological, social, financial violence, gender-based violence, and discrimination against women in Saudi Arabia was, and trust me on this, rather limited. Saudi women probably face the same challenges that all the other women around the world. But trust me when I tell you it's much less. They're very powerful, especially at home. And their say goes. Furthermore, and as I will discuss in a second too, in post-2020 reforms, it allowed women over 21 years old now to have their own passports. They can travel abroad without any guardian's permission. Though there are other restrictions, including the consent of a male guardian to get married or obtain certain health care, all of these are still in the books. Still, Remember what we talked about, the fact that society, Saudi Arabia, is paternalistic. It's a paternalistic society. In a highly paternalistic society, marriage questions, divorce, family issues, decisions that are related to children, including child custody if there is divorce, these are heart-wrenching, as they are everywhere else. Though mercifully, those were slowly evolving. And towards the end, after June 2021, authorities amended the personal status law. The personal status law is sometimes known as the family law. It's the same thing. Personal status is the official title, but it's really the family law, which removed previous language that required the immediate enforcement of court decisions to send a woman caught in a legal catch-22 to her mahram. The mahram in Arabic is the husband or the brother or the father, the male, the closest male relative who is responsible for that woman. It was removed. Now women can go and have their pictures taken without a veil so that they can have their own passports. Well, you need to have a picture taken without a veil in order to travel abroad, because when you arrive at Heathrow Airport in London, and even though you might be covered, the officer will tell you to remove the hijab, to remove the niqab. They need to see your face to make sure that you're the same person. So therefore, now a Saudi woman is entitled to have her own passport. They don't need, in fact, in my book on Ifat al-Thunayyan, King Faisal's wife, I was privileged to write a book about a woman in Saudi Arabia. Don't ask me how I managed to do that. It was complicated. I have copies of her passports, and there are no pictures in it. In the old days, there were no pictures. But of course, she was a diplomat. She was a queen. And a queen can travel, unlike us, with security escorts and everything. But there were no pictures in her passport. And I put a copy of that in the appendix of the book so that people can see for themselves. Now that is not the case anymore. You have to have a picture, literally. Now, what was often, I will stop in a few minutes, we'll open for discussion. What was often overlooked in Western discussions that can be clarified is the fact that Riyadh has pledged to continue its efforts to promote and protect human rights by harmonizing national legislation and practices with international human rights standards, guided by the kingdom's values and principles. Indeed, the pledge was reiterated in late 2023, a year ago, during an event to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations headquarters, Human Rights Council in Geneva. According to a report published by the Saudi press agency, the head of the Saudi Human Rights Commission, Hala al-Tuwaijri, a woman, declared that the anniversary was a valuable opportunity to review what has been accomplished over the past 75 years and draw lessons from events in order to correct the course of human rights in an atmosphere of constructive dialogue and respect for global and cultural diversity. Furthermore, I'm quoting her now, Hala al-Tuwaijri, the kingdom underlined its commitment to leveraging its global position and influence to contribute to the settlement of regional and international conflicts. In addition, Saudi Arabia vowed to maintain global cooperation and solidarity in upholding the pillars of the United Nations, including peace and security, human rights, and development. Now, before I stop, and we go to the second part in a few moments, I hope that now it's clear to you that the kingdom has addressed human rights challenges head on. I don't mean to imply, and please don't misunderstand me, that Saudi Arabia has become now paradise on earth. There are still abuses that take place, like in every society. But past misjudgments have now stopped. And this is compatible both with Sharia law and it is compatible with the development agenda of the government, that they want to be part of the world. Vision 2030 is as you will see next, is entirely based on the legal reforms that have been introduced since very recently, in 2-3 years. So it's too early to know whether or not all of these laws will be completely applied. Hopefully they will be applied and nothing will change. And that one day soon, before too long, even the penal code would be applied. Now, I want to, before I stop and open for question, I want to say just a few words about penal code because we will not have time to go into it. Eventually, you read the paper. Why was the penal code not published so far? What is holding it up? It's the death penalty issue. It's the death penalty issue. That's why it has not been published yet. Death penalty is a very sensitive question. Most European countries have abolished the death penalty. People that used to butcher each other on a regular basis said, enough, we don't want to do that. Today, there are still several countries that practice the death penalty, including the United States. A couple of weeks ago, President Joe Biden, before he left office, he commuted about 90 individuals who are on death penalty. He commuted their death sentences because Donald Trump said he wants to execute all of them. These are federal criminals, not state criminals, different things. And the United States still practices the death penalty. But if you commute them, the president has a right to pardon. The president has every right to pardon any criminal for any offense. Instead of executing them, they condemn them to prison for life, essentially. And Mr. Trump now, the new president, cannot undo the pardon because they've been pardoned. Double jeopardy is not allowed according to the Constitution. You cannot be tried twice for the same crime, only one time. So therefore, these 90 people, or whatever the number is, 79 or 80 people, I think one of them refused to accept the pardon because his lawyers told him not to. He had a better case otherwise to be freed. So therefore, this occurred. So the United States practices the death penalty, so does China. China also practices the death penalty. In Europe, it is now forbidden. In Saudi Arabia, the death penalty still applies. The death penalty is still in the books because it's compatible with Sharia law. And this is the reason why a lot of countries that are investing in Saudi Arabia are cautious about this. They don't know whether one of their employees is going to be caught in a crime. What will happen to that individual? In Iran, same thing. The death penalty applies. If, for example, let's say a British subject working for a company commits a crime, according to Sharia law in Saudi Arabia, that British subject will be executed. Obviously, the company will not be too happy about that, nor would the British government be happy about that, and they would want to change that. So, for the time being, they are trying to figure out how they're going to address this issue. That's why they're not publishing the law yet. But I guarantee you, at the end of the day, in order for it to be compatible with Sharia law, it has to apply. Unless you abolish the death penalty entirely, which you can do if you want to, or as what King Abdullah has done several times, he forgave condemned prisoners. He said, I give you a pardon. He is the king, like the president, a king can issue a pardon. Therefore, you're not executed. How they're going to work it out, we don't know yet. Hopefully, it will be better than we hope. Why don't I stop here, let them ask questions, and then I'll continue the paper.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, sir. Thank you, Professor Kesisian, for the wonderful lecture. Really, Sharia today even continues to apply in Saudi Arabia. As we know, Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Isma have been important sources of the Saudi legal structure. And the important point he highlighted and thrust upon is particularly the post 2017 reforms era in the sectors of, if you know about it, the personal status law, civil transaction law. Then third one is the penal code, and the fourth one is about the evidence law. These are the important segments in which the Saudi Arabia brought reforms, and I'm sure that these reforms are truly carried out in Latin spirit. It would help in augmenting the Saudi pillars of Vision 2030. So now the floor is open for discussion. The first round starts now. Please, anybody? You can just take it.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for your lecture. I would like to know what are the laws for the tourist? Are they on the equal pedestal as Saudi Arabian citizens, or are there any different laws for tourists? Because as there is a legal maxim in Latin which says ignorantia juris non excusat, which means ignorance of law is no excuse. So I would like to know your views on that.
Anybody, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for the lecture. I wanted to know about abortion laws in the Saudi Arabia, and what does Sharia says about abortion. Thank you.
About abortion?
Yeah.
Abortion, okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Myself, Roshan. And my question is that Saudi Arabia still has one of the highest rate of capital punishment. So how it affects its global view, or sorry, global image in the world, and its soft power as well, and how Saudi Arabia is going to deal with this problem, and how it will improve its global image as well as its soft power. Thank you.
First thing about the law applying for citizens versus foreigners, or expatriate workers in particular. According to the new codes, the law applies to everyone, citizens and non-citizens alike. Now, privileges, however, apply differently for Saudis versus non-Saudis. But if you commit a crime in Saudi Arabia, then the law applies to you whether you are a local or a foreigner. But for example, in personal status law, that is going to apply to Saudis only, because presumably if you are a foreigner, you're not married unless you're married to a local person. In that case, because one of the parties is a citizen of the country, then the personal status law or the family law will apply. But if you are, for example, a British subject living in Saudi Arabia, personal status law will not apply to you. The divorce and marriage and whatever would occur in a British legal system, not in the Saudi legal system. So therefore, it depends on what you do. For criminal offenses in Saudi Arabia, the penal code will apply, but the personal status law will not apply. For businesses, for example, the commercial laws that are now being developed, obviously it applies to foreign corporations, just as it applies to local corporations. So it depends on the case. Abortion is illegal in Islam, including in Saudi Arabia. It's illegal. It's considered to be murder. It doesn't mean that there is no cases of abortion, especially for the wealthy, who can travel, who can have an abortion in a number of countries. So therefore, this is another one of the dilemmas that society has come to terms with. This is one of those subjects that is very emotional. And I am not the best person to answer this question. for a variety of reasons, which I'm not going to go into here. But in my humble opinion, this should be a family affair between a husband and a wife, or a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and vice versa. This is a very tragic situation. Abortion is a tragedy. But I understand that there could be circumstances where it might be necessary to save the life of the woman, for example, if she is in danger of dying. And not just in Islam, you know, I happen to be a practicing Roman Catholic, and abortion is forbidden for us too. So therefore, as I said, I'm not the best qualified individual to answer your question. It's a tragedy. But the law in Saudi Arabia now is very clear. Abortion is illegal. It is illegal. Capital punishment. Saudi Arabia is not actually one of the highest countries with capital punishment now. It's not. It is high. As I have mentioned to you, in 2021, there were 52 capital punishment cases. At any given time, there are between 200 and 300 capital punishments per year, mostly for murder. And as I said, in the past, people were executed for drug dealing. Now they're not. You go to prison for that. Iran executes almost 1,000 persons per year. China executes more than that. Saudi Arabia is not one of the highest capital punishment practitioners in the world. Now, capital punishment, you know, as long as human beings have been around, there were certain crimes that were not tolerated by a lot of societies, murder being the most evident one. Murder is not something that societies tolerated. So, within the international community, Saudi Arabia has now responsibilities as well. You don't want to give the impression, the image that you are a barbarian regime. So people talk about capital punishment as being something really negative. But we are seeing what's happening in Gaza during the past 2 years with the bombardments of Gaza, where all these children are being killed. Almost 100,000 people have been bombarded to death. We are seeing the war in Ukraine. Almost 1 million people have died on both sides. And people point the finger at capital punishment in this country or that country for criminals that were tried in a court of law and found guilty and therefore executed. How about all the genocide that is taking place in Gaza? You see what I'm saying? So I think you have to have, you as a young man, you have to have proportionality in your judgment. Use your skill for proportionality. Do not fall into the trap of saying capital punishment is an abuse of human rights, where there is a criminal that has been tried in a court of law for a crime that they committed, found guilty and executed, versus a government that kills left and right, sends airplanes with bomb, destroys entire buildings, turns children into powder. That's okay? Use your proportionality.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I want to. Okay, sir. Yeah. Sir, I want to ask about that. Where do the consultations of Majlis-e-Shura stand today in Saudi Arabia while decoding the Sharia laws, especially in the case where you mentioned criticizing the ruler
over the matters of interpretations. I actually relate this to something which I read in a book related to the execution of Imam Ibn Hanbal, where he was opposed to the ruler while making interpretations about the treasury issues. There was something which the ruler did regarding the treasury matters, and Imam Ibn Hanbal, who was at that time was the Imam who interpreted for the ruler, but he was opposed to the ruler and he was executed for the same matter. So how do the consultations of Majlis Shura, that is my main question, primarily address the issue of criticizing the ruler and interpreting the like Sharia laws? Thank you.
Hello, sir. My question is related this question, the previous question, regarding the Hanbali conformism in Saudi Arabia. How do you think that how much it's a constraint for the Saudi society to criticize the ruler? I mean, how kingdom can say this is un-Islamic to criticize a ruler actually? It's a very critical question. Even the freedom and the political opening, do you think it's a main constraint to not opening or political reforms, or easy for the citizens? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the lecture. So my question is that is there an indication of any shift in the blasphemy laws in Saudi Arabia under the legal regime, especially in the backdrop of Vision 2030, where Prince is very much concerned in changing the religious position of the country?
Sir, I wanted to know that does Sharia law protects the rights of persons with disability? And as you mentioned, sir, after 2017, they did legal reforms. So please enlighten me that the law protects the women's, specifically the persons of disability, the social, economic upliftment and their rights, etc. Thank you, sir.
All right. Criticizing rulers is pretty much forbidden. As I have explained as much as possible, even from the days of 1744, about which I will say more tomorrow. Tomorrow I will talk about the religious establishment. Today I'm talking about legal reforms. Tomorrow I will talk about the pact, 1744 pact. I will talk about Abdul Wahab and the alliance with the Al-Saud and so on. That's tomorrow. Be patient until tomorrow. But the urf that I mentioned in my presentation is that you don't criticize the ruler. Now, if a Saudi were to go about walking down the street and say, King Salman, God forbid, is a dog, what do you think will happen to him? Before the government intervenes, other members around him will beat the hell out of him. How dare you speak like that about our king? The government has not intervened. The other members of society will intervene because this is not done. This is not in the traditions of the kingdom. There is a lot of respect for authority. There is a lot of respect for power. And as I mentioned several times now, Mohammed bin Salman is very popular. People actually like him. They like him for what he is. Now, in the Hanbali traditions with freedoms, again, the two questions are related. In the Hanbali traditions, in general, in Arab societies and in Muslim societies in general, there is a great deal of respect for authority. This comes really from the old days. It's nothing new. It comes from tribal traditions, from the Bedou traditions, where there was a lot of respect for higher ranking authority, father figure, mother figure. You would be surprised, for example, how Saudi men, grown up men, 50-year-old men, will kneel in front of his mom and kiss her hand and kiss her feet. This is very common because of the respect towards the parents. And the same for the rulers as well. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody likes the rulers. There are people in Saudi Arabia who don't like the Al Saud. All right, there are 8 of them, maybe more than 8, but they're not too many. Let's put it that way. So there is this urf, this tradition, whereby you have a great deal of respect to authority, the authority. It just so happens now in Saudi Arabia, it's a monarchy, and it is the Al Saud family. Before the Al Saud came, as you know, this is the 3rd monarchy, 1, 2, 3. There were periods when the Al Rashid, for example, were ruling several parts of Najd, the heart of Arabia. Well, at that time, the authority and the respect was towards the Al Rashid. Okay, they lost out to the Al Saud, the authority shifted, but the tradition has not shifted. The same thing with respect to the religious establishment. There is a great deal of respect to the imams, to the sheikhs. There is a natural respect for the man of cloth, so to speak. You would never find, for example, someone insulting a religious leader. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. I mean, in the Western countries, perhaps in societies, there is a lot of disrespect now that is shown to religious figures, let's say. Not everybody, of course, but there are some. You will not find that in Islam. And the Hanbali tradition is not any different from the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Shafi'i for the Shi'as. It's all the same. There is a lot of respect for authority. And of course, the blasphemy laws, that's an important question. How are blasphemy laws changing? Blasphemy, remember what I've been telling you, right? Sharia law applies. Blasphemy against whom? Against God? Obviously, that's not done. Who insults God? Blasphemy for what? Blasphemy against your neighbor? Blasphemy against your family members? It's just not done. I mean, it happens, but generally speaking, people are very respectful. Personal behavior really matters. In Saudi Arabia and the other Muslim countries throughout the region, blasphemy laws, even in the political arena, as we were just discussing, it's frowned upon. You don't do that. Have the laws changed in the book? They have not. They're still the same. And you will see in a second, for example, when I will talk about the law of evidence, in order to conduct blasphemy, you have to breach certain codes. You better be careful what you're saying, because there is a price to pay. You have to have the evidence. And blasphemy is a very subjective topic. Very subjective topic. What might be blasphemous to you might not be blasphemous to an atheist. Mercifully, in the Muslim world, there are not too many atheists. I'm sure there are some, but not too many. Otherwise, they will not be Muslim. A Muslim is a believer, by definition. Just like a Christian is, just like a Jew is, just like a Buddhist is. If you're a believer, you cannot be an atheist. There are atheists, of course, but they're not the majority. The majority of people on this planet are believers in one God or another. And in India, mashallah alaykum, yani, you have lots of gods. You need more gods than one. Indian society likes plurality. Finally, on empowerment, the empowerment of women and disabled. Yeah, the disabled. No, I got it. This is a tough one. Disabled individuals, whether physically disabled, visually disabled, a number of other disabilities, obviously the laws have got to care for them. Now, the good thing about a place like Saudi Arabia, because it does not have a very large population, most disabled individuals are looked after by society itself. You will not find many beggars in the streets of Saudi Arabia. A disabled person is not on his own or her own. There are institutions to help. And a lot of charity organizations exist to look after disabled individuals. It's not always successful, but mostly it is done very well. And the princesses of the ruling family, most of the princesses of the ruling family, either are the leaders or the chairwoman of various charities that look after a variety of disabilities, whether it is physical disability or something else. The worst part is not the physical disability, it's the mental disability. The mental disability is far more serious because obviously the discrepancies that exist in society between the wealthy and the poor, that's a real disability that has to come to terms with. And how you manage that, it's not by law. Laws don't address these issues. You cannot have a law that says, you have to take care of disabled people. The laws are there, but obviously this is a responsibility of members of society. In Islam, as I'm sure you know, the Islamic community takes care of everyone in the community, including the disabled, at the local level, at the mosque level, where there are a variety of institutions that look after the neighborhood in which these individuals might be.
Thanks. Another round.
Don't remove it, just give it like that. That way you don't have to
it's
struggle
fine.
to put it back and forth.
Again. Another round.
Practical things, Instead of removing it and putting it back, just take the whole thing. I tend to be practical. Yeah, exactly.
Good, good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question is that in Saudi Arabia, women face a discrimination.
Women face discrimination?
Yes, sir.
How did you discover this?
Because sir, they don't allow to vote and don't.
I've been telling you the opposite. Where have you been? We're talking about 50 years ago.
No, sir, sir, listen that.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, sir.
Sorry.
Or sir, you hear about 2011 driving campaign in Saudi Arabia held, or Saudi government also decide a special dress code for a woman when they go out, like called in Muslim scarf in face. I don't know what in Muslim word called. In matlab face in scarf.
Okay.
And also, sir, in February the Valentine Day is coming. in Saudi market, the don't allow to celebrate Valentine Day, and in even shop anyone get a heart shape like things, they arrested. So what?
So what's your question?
Sir, my question is that ki Saudi Arabia government is not a monarchy or not a dictatorship, is extreme upper level.
Okay. All right, I'll answer. Okay, next.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the lecture. My question is about the provisions of triple talaq. Like, are there any provisions for women who are bestowed upon divorce by their husbands? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My question is very basic. Like, what is the judiciary structure in Saudi Arabia, and how the judges like appointed by the ruler? Like, is there a condition that you should be a Sunni, like Islam? You have a degree in Islamic law, or how like how much it's related to the question that this lady asked, that how much they have the power right now to codify all those things. If they are codifying, like if there is a sharia law and there is this codification, so which law gonna get more superiority when it comes to certain cases? Thank you.
I will start with this last point. Judges are appointed. They're all appointed by the king. All the judges are appointed by the king to apply Sharia law. Their qualifications can follow two tracks. They either follow the teachings of a particular imam or sheikh, and they learn from that individual and get a degree from that individual to qualify, or they do the legal precept at one of the universities of Islamic studies, like the Imam Muhammad University, where they actually teach theology. So there are two ways. You can either do the traditional way, from teacher to student, and then you go in front of a board and you qualify, and of course the king must appoint you, or you follow the legal school. You get a degree as an attorney before you become a judge, obviously. Now, however, having said this, this is where it gets to be pretty tricky, because in the past this was a male-dominated environment. Now, women are also allowed to get degrees in law and to practice law, and that's new. It's been only less than a decade for women to actually practice law in Saudi Arabia. They've been very successful in commercial law. They've been very successful in dealing with international companies, dealing with legal issues, because that's very technical and it's very clear, and you follow the legal precepts, and it borrows a lot from international legal precepts as well. It's more difficult when it comes to personal status issues, family law, where you have to go in front of a judge. As you know, in a divorce case, for example, a child who is less than 7 years old goes always to the mother, no questions asked. Even if the mother is an abuser, it happens, trust me. After 7 years old, the judge will make a decision, and in most cases it goes to the father, which is unfair for a 7-year-old child. But divorce, as some of you might be the children of divorced parents, and you know how tough that is. Divorce is ugly, and I don't recommend it. It's no different now in Saudi Arabia, where you have these dilemmas. But the novelty is that now, for the first time, you have attorneys, female attorneys, that go and defend their clients in front of a judge. And that's very positive, that's very developed, that's very well developed, and developing even more and more. And the judges, the male judges, are now in front of a dilemma. They don't know how to react sometimes, because they have competent people in front of them. You have an attorney that has mastered the file, knows the law, especially that the personal status law has been published. Everything is codified. It specifically says, this is what happens in this case, and the precedent says that kind of stuff. It's all clear now, right? And you will see in a few moments when I discuss the publication of all these legal precepts. So the judge that is listening to a female attorney has a dilemma. What kind of judgment do I pass? Do I overrule this attorney? Do I say, no, you're wrong, go back and study some more, this is not acceptable? Or do I say, well, this attorney has done her homework, she knows what she is talking about, and I cannot but judge in her favor or in her client's favor? So therefore, This is a change that is very pertinent, very important. And most of these young women, and mostly they are young, of course, this is a new field, are very competent. They have degrees from professional law degrees from prominent universities inside and outside of the kingdom. In the old days, you didn't have this stuff. And the judge decided, as they say in Arabic, ala zawqu, at his whim, not anymore. Now, divorce, can a woman divorce in Saudi Arabia and how that is protected? Yes, of course. In Islam, a woman can divorce, but you have to have evidence. You have to show the evidence that, in fact, the husband is an abuser, for example, or the husband is not fulfilling their duties at home. I'm not just talking about sexual duties. I'm talking about helping out or whatever, if there is, if the husband, for example, leaves the home for 6 months at a time and disappears. Muslim men are allowed to marry 4 women simultaneously, right? But if you're a Muslim, I assume you want to be a good Muslim. You don't want to be a bad Muslim. And you want to have 4 wives, which is the legal right to have 4 wives. The Quran is clear. You have to treat all 4 equally. I dare any man on this planet to treat 2 women equally, much less 4. So you make the case for divorce, you go in front of a judge, you present the evidence. My husband has been AWOL, absent without leave, for 6 months. He's gone, I want a divorce. And she'll get it. She'll get the divorce. It's much more difficult, obviously, for a female to divorce than it is for a male. A man can say in public 3 times, I divorced thee, I divorced thee, I divorced thee. And of course now they're sending Twitters to each other. I divorced you online. That also happens, unfortunately. That's another form of abuse, if you ask me. But it's done, it's possible. It's tough, but it's done. And is there discrimination against women? Of course there is discrimination against women. Of course. Just as much there is discrimination against men. Look, you guys, you've now heard me for 4 days. I've been talking to you for 4 days. You've pretty much figured me out by now. You know that I'm a crazy guy. Happily crazy. I consider human beings to be a work in progress, including myself. I'm not perfect. I have my shortcomings as well. But human beings have a lot to learn. Have a lot to learn. The most important thing that none of us has ever learned until we are very old, it takes a long time for a human being to learn this lesson, is to be nice and to be kind. It takes a long time for us to learn this lesson. We don't teach our children when they're young to be, we tell them, be nice, love and share, love and share. That's not enough. We need to actually teach them to be kind, to be respectful. Those things take a long time to mature in a human being. So discrimination is a reality. It exists at all levels, for women, for men, for children. Hopefully one day, man will evolve. What do you think? We will evolve?
Yeah.
I am not holding my breath. It might take another 8,888 years, but let's be patient.
So